Being discovered as a brand online is more prevalent now than in any other time in history, which puts the humble brand site in sharp focus as a critical tool of influence. MC, we're talking about the intersection of brand and website today.
Cool.
There's a lot to unpack here. It might even be 2 episodes.
Sure, we'll see how we go.
Let's see how we go. So let's start out with what a website should do.
Sure. I mean, a website, I guess, is something that seems very obvious at first. Everyone knows what a website is. But I think certainly in the context of our chats around branding and those sorts of things, it's actually, I see it really as the culmination of all the stuff that we've been talking about so far, So it's a place where you're going to get all the visual elements of the brand come together. You're going to get all the messaging of the brand come together. It's a place to differentiate. It's a place to tell your story, get that messaging across. It's a place to serve your customers' needs. We talk a lot about that customer focus. So certainly it's a place to get a lot of those jobs done. And it's definitely the first impression, that a lot of people are going to have with your brand. So there's certainly a massive intersection, as you say, between brand and web.
Yeah, that's such a big one, I reckon, the first interaction, because I guess if you went back 15 or 20 years ago, that wouldn't have been the case. And even as recent as maybe 5 years ago, that may not even been the first interaction point.
Yeah.
But now it is, like from everything from getting your car serviced right the way through to doing your groceries online, like pretty much every aspect of our life has now been mapped in a digital way.
Yeah, for sure.
So that first interaction point is such a critical one.
Yeah, I mean, you think about it either in terms of the Google effect. So, when you're looking for somewhere to get your car serviced, you go through that singular portal and then you spat out to a bunch of results. That is the first time, you're likely to hear of that brand or business, as a result of that, as opposed to, a bunch of other ways that you would have discovered, recommendations before, whether it be word of mouth or whatever. And then even as a sort of quasi first/second impression, you meet someone at a networking event and they tell you about their brand, you might get a tiny bit, but the first thing that you're going to go away and do is look them up on the web.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a big one. We all do it, right?
Yeah.
We all go and step away and do the Google stalk and try and figure out who's who in the zoo and figure what their brand's all about.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think also too, just to add to that, it's like being able to tell those rich stories, like be it through imagery or be it through copy, those top to bottom page flows, that richness in the story, that's a huge advantage of a website as well too, is you have that opportunity to do that. Whereas I guess back in the day you might have had a bus shelter or a billboard and there's only one layer to that.
Yeah.
Whereas the website gives you the opportunity to kind of go layers deep.
Yeah, that's a great point.
The other one for me too is like just automating those business processes. I think that's another big factor of what a modern website should do as well. And it gives you the ability to serve more people at scale. So I think that's another big advantage.
Yeah, that sort of brings up the question of exactly what is a website.
Yeah.
It can be a lot of different things these days.
It can.
Did you have any thoughts on what other things a website can do beyond, what we usually think of as a brand website?
Yeah, I think the website, if you look at it kind of really like at a 101 level, it is about telling the brand story. But then beyond that, there's obviously some other tactical elements. And I think this is where we're starting to kind of think about things. As brands, we're thinking about what are the other aspects a website can do. So, can it handle a booking and remove a job, or can it just free up your some team members' time so that they've got the ability to do other things that are possibly more important.
Yeah, I look at it almost as in, can you get the job done there and then? It used to be the whole thing of, well, here's some information and a contact form, and you can't do anything else beyond take the next step of getting in touch to then try and get your job done later. But whether it's customer support or registering for an event, or as you say, booking a meeting, or even, with chatbots or something, putting in some information, actually getting your answer there and then. There's a lot more scope, I guess, to get the job done.
Yeah, I mean, if you take that right to the far edges, it's like, for instance, recently I was applying for some personal insurance online, and I did the whole thing online, assisted through a process that would just been kind of mapped out, like I would have done with a human, but they just implanted that whole experience into a digital experience, and so there was no need for any human interaction in that whole process. So, yeah.
Is that good or bad? It's a bit sad.
Well,
that's a topic for another podcast.
That's a topic for a whole other day. But I mean, I think that's the thing is I don't think it really matters at what scale you're at the moment. Like you could be a one-man operator, or you could be a big ASX listed company, and I think the opportunities all the way along that spectrum at the moment.
Yeah, certainly the tech is enabling it to be a lot more accessible to everybody, like you say. With the out of the box chatbots and things like that, or meeting plugins and that sort of thing. It's all a lot easier these days.
Yeah. So why don't we talk about that? Why don't we dig into like what are the elements that go into a brand website?
Yeah, I mean, there's the process side of it, I guess. And for us, I guess a key factor of that is having a certain amount of work done and locked away before you get to this point. If we think about that idea of this being a culmination of brand, combining those visuals and messages and that sort of thing, having all that really clear before you start, I think is key. It's easy to kind of rush into a website, thinking that you've got everything sorted, or even try and, I guess, nail your messaging by writing the copy for the site, or, you might have a logo, but then you try and, I guess, establish the brand identity through the design of the website. And, we've just seen that just doesn't work. You've got to have that foundation brand somewhat in place.
Yep.
We definitely see that it evolves a bit, so you might write some messaging in the abstract and then find when you get into a particular page, you need to tweak it or add more to that messaging to make it clear for that purpose. But
so that foundational layer that we've been talking about, so if this is the first podcast that you've listened to so far in this series, you need to go back and listen to podcast 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 to get the foundational layer.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because they're the ingredients, I guess, in this cake, or at least the baseline ingredients.
Yep.
I guess we look at all that stuff first, and then I guess the main thing really then is looking at what are the goals, and what we find all the time is that comes down to a bit of a balancing act. So we're always trying to balance up the user goals with the business goals. So, for any given website, there's the stuff that the user wants to get done on that site, whether it's as simple as finding the office address or, looking at the staff list to know who to talk to. So that's what the user wants to do. And then you've got the business goals. So what are they actually hoping to get out of that interaction? Whether it's book a meeting or make a sale, that sort of thing. So there's obviously a bunch of overlap between those two, and so it's finding the balance and making sure that you can tick both sets of goals. And then the other things that we look at, and again, this is a bit of a balance, is between messaging and conversion. So on the messaging side, it's like, what do we want to say? What do we want to communicate through the website and particular pages and sections? And so we're trying to say, what's the story that we're pushing? And then on the other side, what's the conversion that we want out of it? Again, that's probably aligned very much to the business goals, but we're looking, I guess, at a balance there between giving information, but also triggering action.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of like to look at it through two lenses. It's like one is the brand lens, which is what you were talking about before. So you've got to do all that foundational work to build up the story before you even think about building a website. And I guess if you go back in the day, like a lot of brand websites were like brochure websites. That's I guess another way of describing it. It's like where it's just telling the brand story. What has really opened up over the last 5 or 6 years is the tactical element of all of this. So I kind of see it through two lenses. One is brand, one is tactical, and you bring those together. And I think that's what's probably leading towards this supercharged type of brand website. Yeah,
and I think that's probably talks a lot to that balance that we try and look for too. We certainly see it a lot that you get websites today that still exist very much in one of those camps or the other. So the beautiful brand experience website, that's all about amazing design, great messaging, animations, maybe some crazy interaction, but doesn't do a lot on the tactical side, or conversion side. And then you've got the other end where it's all landing page driven and very templated and not much about the story, and there's pop-ups coming in everywhere.
Right, strips out the brand experience.
Or just diminishes it, quite a lot, compromises it, completely, well, not completely, but heavily, I guess, at the expense of
the tactical stuff. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I mean, and just talking about like some of the nuances in terms of how a website gets built, because I reckon a few listeners would have heard like terms like wireframe, for example. Like, should we dig into wireframe and what that actually means and why they're important in the process?
Yeah, I mean, even if we just skirt over the 10,000 feet view, I guess, of how the websites get made, and that wireframes is definitely one of those parts. So I guess we go from establishing those goals to doing a quick sitemap, which is basically what are the pages of the site, how's that going to be organized, and that's often, I think, a key sort of user experience point that gets a bit overlooked. Is the way that you organize the sitemap will have a huge influence over how easily people can get around, whether they can find what they're looking for, that sort of thing. And with most things, we, I guess, err very much on the simpler side of things. And then once we've got that sitemap established, we then do a wireframe for every page, basically. And all that is really is it's the bridge between, say, having all your content written in a Word doc, and getting to that first page design. So we lay up all the elements that we think will go into to a page on the site. For example, a home page, and look at what are the content blocks going to be, what sort of content will go into each block. You might start to see some initial photography or copywriting go into those wireframes, but they're very lo-fi intentionally. It's almost really just a way to start visualizing how that content's going to come together, because it's very difficult to get that sort of picture from something like a Google Doc.
And there's an interesting point here about wireframes too in process is when we go right back to the strategy piece, when we're sitting down for the first time with a customer and you're getting all those insights about the business, those insights are driving story points in the wireframe. Yeah,
exactly. So whenever we're looking then at a wireframe, we're laying that up against those messaging and conversion goals that we've established earlier on, and sort of saying, okay, well, these are the things that we set out for this page to say. That's your messaging goals. So the culture of the company is fun and engaging. So then, you'll look then at the content that you're laying down for that page and see if it's actually communicating that message. So that's a tick. And then you might have a conversion goal on that same page of, you want people to submit their resumes to apply for a job, if we're talking about an about page, for example. So again, it gives you that checklist. But that's what makes, I guess, a wireframe that great interim step, because you're not spending hours then making design pixel perfect, which can, take up a lot of time. You're actually making sure that you've got the right building blocks in place first, and then, in a very quick and sort of lo-fi way that can be easily changed and moved around before you move on.
And this is actually something that a business can actually have a stab at themselves, right? Before,
for sure.
Internally, it's like starting to think about what are your story points. Now, you might want to gut check that with whoever you're working with on a project, but you can actually start this internally yourself and start thinking about what are the things that you want to get across on each of the sections of your website, and then also what level of functionality is required for each page.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the other layer to wireframes. You can start to really confirm those functional requirements. Where's there going to be interactivity? If I click this button, where's it going to take me? Those sorts of things, which again are very hard to do in a sort of word processor type format, and then also not really ready for design, I guess, and if you haven't kind of locked those things away.
Yeah, so that takes care of wireframes, but the step after wireframes is really important too, which is where you start looking at the design layer. And design is such a critical part of a website and in telling the story. And just generally speaking, in design, we've come a long way when it comes to website design, just as far as an industry, where we've sort of stepped away from a million links and density in the design to clean and using great photography styles and and layouts. But is design well, I guess I would say, how critical is design in the process?
I mean, for a design agency, we're always going to say it's critical. So I guess it's then establishing why. I mean, I think in the same vein as the conversations we had last week about identity,
yep,
the most baseline factor, I guess, is just purely that trust and confidence that you get immediately when you come across a well-designed site.
Yep.
You know, if there's, I guess if you look at it the other extreme, you know, if there's sloppy layouts or broken links or missing pictures or stuff like that, I mean, that is the number one way to kill any credibility or interest straight away.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's at one end. And then at the other end, like good design, I guess, would definitely be engaging as well and I guess keep your attention. You know, there's that oft quoted stat about however many seconds it is that you have, you know, to keep user attention on the web before they're clicking off to go somewhere else. You know, so whatever that number is definitely established, I guess, that you want to make that first impression, wherever that might be on the site, engaging enough to keep people interested.
Yeah, for sure. I think the other interesting thing about the design phase is because it's still largely static, we haven't jumped into any code yet, there's a great opportunity to prototype and actually share that with potential users or do some user research in and around the static design.
Yeah, for sure.
Before you step into it. Beneficially, what's the upside of doing that?
Well, I mean, it's an interesting point that you raise there in terms of clarifying, I guess, that the design isn't just how it looks, you know, and whether that's engaging, but certainly there's a key layer of design there around how things will work, how they're connected again, how you'll get from point A to point B. And yeah, certainly be able to putting that into one of the modern prototyping tools, which is really quite easy these days, and then send that off to, you know, a few users to click around. You know, you'll pick up, I guess, any glaring, you know, points of confusion, because I think that's one of the most important parts of a website is it's great to tell that brand story, but am I giving the user clarity? Like, have they actually got the information that they wanted? Have they arrived at this business probably not knowing a lot, but now it's really clear what that business does? And as much as, you know, we might sit there and pour hours and hours into a site and think about it as this entire user journey where they're going to go to every page, I mean, most of the time the user goal is probably actually more to get in and get out. You know, they've got something better to do with their day than browse and read every single bit of copy on the site. So I guess part of that user testing is to understand, with the way that we've done that content architecture so far, is it logical? Is it easy to navigate around? And what's missing as well, you know, often you'll find they'll be like, oh, okay, well, I wanted to know this, but it wasn't even in the site. Those sorts of things.
Yeah, so once design's locked down, the next step is to shift into development. This is where we're like hand coding, custom building a website. But typically for us, the next step is to shift into development. And we're only sort of touching these things at the 1,000-foot view. Yeah. But development is another critical piece in all of this as well, for a number of reasons. And you've got front-end development, which is, I guess, what the user interacts with. And so they're like different hover states and animations and other aspects of the website. And then you've got back-end, which kind of deals more with like plugging in APIs where two pieces of software can talk together, which enables some of these performance or tactical elements of the website. But development is a pretty critical piece. And what would you say the key benefit there is? Yeah,
I mean, I sort of almost look at it as the engine that runs the car. Yeah. And partly what I mean by that as well is like code is one of those things that unfortunately most people don't know how it works, or you can't see it, you know, like in the same way you can't see the inner workings of your car engine. Most people, if you pull up the hood you see this big blank box and you don't know what's going on.
Yeah, it's a good analogy.
You know, so it's definitely tricky, you know, for an outsider to look at it and go, well, that's great code. But it is so essential and crucial to performance, and that can mean a lot of different things, whether that's, your SEO rankings, whether that's page speed, and that has implications obviously both for your Google rankings but also for user experience. I mean, if someone's sitting there and it's taking forever for your site to load, that's one of those things where they will probably close that tab and move on pretty quick.
Yep.
Certainly maintainability over time. I mean, it's one of the nature of web that it never stands still, and things will always just evolve. You'll find bugs, just inherently, technology evolves. So having, well maintained and clean code to start with will make the site easier to maintain over time.
It's a big
benefits.
One. Cool. And then I guess in the same breath, talking about development, there is content management. So quite often it's that the customer wants to manage the content management system on their side versus, say, have somebody always having to update it for them. It just really depends on requirements. But the content management systems are a bit of a minefield as well, right?
I mean, there's certainly no shortage of choice out there.
Yep.
And I guess what we find is that people are often either at one end of the scale where they have no idea, they've never used one before, so I guess they're sort of a bit green in that respect, so they don't even necessarily know what they want out of one. And then I guess you see the other end where it's like usually WordPress, but there's a couple of others ones that maybe have some religious type following, but it's basically where it's like, I've used this before, or I've been told that this is the best, I have to use this one. So they're either seem to have very little idea or a almost predetermined choice.
Yep.
So really, I guess, I mean, if you're interacting with someone like us, it's probably a case of figuring out, well, what do you actually need it to do first, and then recommending the right tool.
Yeah.
Whereas, I don't think coming, I guess, with a predefined solution when you're maybe not even necessarily sure why, like why is that the answer, is the right way to go.
Yeah.
At a simple level, mostly to me it's about how easily does that sort of content editing experience match up with what you're seeing on the front end, because that's the usual thing that most people want to do is make a few changes and just see the end result. So keeping that as simple as possible is usually the best.
Yeah, I guess the takeaway of the moral of this story sounds like if somebody says WordPress, don't necessarily take it verbatim that's what you've got to do. I mean, WordPress is a great platform, but there are other ones out there, exactly. and it's just finding the right tool that sort of fits the purpose.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. All right, so let's dig into a bit of tactical as well too, because the tactical elements are such a critical part of a brand website.
Yeah.
So we'll just riff on some things that others are doing in the tactical space and how they kind of apply. The first one that comes to mind for me is the lead capture side of things, which a lot of people would have already used or understand, or may even have that already built into their website.
Yeah.
But lead capture is a fairly critical one nowadays, because once we have that email address or that name, then it starts the top of the funnel exercise, and that in itself is a whole other podcast. But but capturing somebody's details so that you can continue to have a conversation with them is a critical component. So lead capture for me is definitely still a big one.
Yeah, for sure.
You mentioned bots before. What sort of bots, and what are they for, and what do they do?
Yeah, I mean the most obvious one, I guess, is the chatbot.
Yep.
So you see on a lot of websites these days, usually a floating bubble in the bottom right corner. There's one on the Ply site now if you want to try and check it out. But basically, I mean, in a lot of ways, it's a fancy contact form, but it can be, I guess, just a way to enhance that interaction and maybe get a few more answers. So there's a couple of I guess options there. One is that it is a real person on the other end, so it might be an actual just a live chat feature as opposed to a bot. So if someone in your customer service team is there manning that chat line all the time, I guess it's much like an old helpline 1300 number that you might have used to have, but people can type in their questions and people can respond. So it's a good way to, I guess, deliver customer service right there in the moment when they're maybe looking at your product page and they've got a question. They can answer it there. The other option is an automated chatbot, and you'll often see that it can be a combination of these things. So it might be a live person during office hours, and then it reverts to an automated chatbot outside of office hours. And mostly what you're looking at there is, I guess, usually like a set of predefined questions that it knows how to answer. So we'll try and, I guess, get the user to ask, what they're after in a certain way, and then serve up the answer automatically if it has it. And basically, I guess if you get to a bit of a dead end in that automated chat, it would then say, okay, I don't have the answer for you, but leave us a message or contact us and we'll get back to you. We're even seeing now like hyper specialized chatbots, so they might be industry specific or use case specific, whether there's a specific chatbot for just booking a meeting, for example. Making those things easier.
Yeah, the other one that comes to mind for me is the event plugin. So there's companies like Eventbrite, for example. There's a few others that have a really good API, and also like a nice little code snippet that plugs into your website, which allow you to sort of serve up events, because that's becoming part of a lot of business models, especially in professional services as well too. The other interesting one for me too is like looking at, say, some of the other examples like law, and we have a particular client who is actually doing kind of almost like an e-commerce part of their website as well too, which is an interesting way to think about tactical elements, like how do you serve up some of your services that are sort of almost pre-packaged up and ready to be sold.
Yeah, sure.
Any other ones that come to mind in terms of tactical?
I guess another one is, we see a bit where the user might be able to access some information that's relevant to them or bespoke to them, and usually I guess think about that probably as like a client area of a website. So we have an accounting client who serves up, I guess, some of their latest information for the client that they need to know, the status of a file, basically through the website. So there's a special area in the site where you can log in if you're a registered client and access a bunch of information and forms and that sort of thing. So certainly seeing more of that. Again, it's about getting that job done there and then in a common place. Yeah, and I guess the other one probably that comes to mind would be just general help and support. The more e-commerce sites or product sites that you see out there, they have a more and more fully developed knowledge base or help center where it moves beyond the FAQs and just has a lot of, I guess, ways to deliver your own support, which I'm sure is delivering benefit to the user because they can get the job sorted right there, but to the business as well because they need less support staff.
Yeah, it makes sense. Let's talk about website as in the term website, because it is a bit shape-shifting in the sense of website is a catch-all for everything that is on the internet now. Yeah. But a website is a website is a website. Yeah. Like there's not just one type. Yeah. But oftentimes we just think that there is only one type. It's like the brand website. But the way that we see it is that there's a number of different layers to it. The first one that comes to mind for me is like kind of at that really entry level of website, which is like a theme or a template, which you can kind of pre-buy off the shelf, which is already kind of set out, and then you've just got to go and input like all of your content into the website. Like it's really pretty much the cheapest way to get started with websites, right? Yeah, for sure. I mean, you're looking at even a couple of options there. So you have something like a Squarespace where it's an all-in-one platform for that sort of thing. So you literally just create an account, choose a template, and you basically have a website. The one that probably a lot more businesses have engaged with, whether they know it or not, is the WordPress theme kind of template route. So you've still got to set up, your own hosting and I guess someone who knows their way around a bit of code or at least implementation of some of that stuff to essentially get WordPress, get a theme, plug them together, and then it's ready to just drop your content in. But yeah, certainly that's the lead way to do it, or the lowest barrier to entry way to do it. Yeah, and then just to quickly riff through some of these we've got, then you can customize a template, which is kind of like the next level. Then you've got the hand-built, custom-built website, which is like that premium brand experience. Then you've got things like e-commerce, platforms like Shopify, And then you've also got web apps, which are for more significant product builds.
Yeah.
So again, you could probably spend a lot of time digging into all of that, but it's really just to say there's a lot, right? Like there's a lot to choose from.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, as always, it's just coming back around to what's right for you and what you're trying to achieve at the time.
Yeah.
We can talk a bit about what goes wrong in websites, and number one on my list of that, is probably a bit of a riff on themes and templates.
Yeah. So let's dig into that.
Well, it's why I bring it up now, because it's not necessarily a wrong way to do it either. It's really just about what's right for you at the time and stage that you're at, perhaps. I think that there's probably a lot of great sites out there that are built on Squarespace that you wouldn't even know, if it's done right. I think the danger and where it goes wrong with those sorts of things is it seems so easy, but it's all the things that you don't know that are kind of going wrong behind the scenes, or that you don't know to look out for. So if you're choosing a theme off Theme Forest for WordPress, for example, we've seen it a lot where there's a lot of code baggage that comes along with, a pre-built theme, because they're trying to build for every possible scenario, every possible page and combo. There's all this bloated code that you're not going to end up needing when you've only got 3 pages at the end on your website. You've got sort of code for 50 when you're only launching with 3. And they rely heavily on a lot of plugins and other things that, again, are harder to maintain over time. It might work great straight out of the box, but when we think about those, bugs creeping in and keeping it maintained over time, they also then, it's one of those things where it's like, fine if you want to use it exactly as it comes out of the box, but as soon as you actually want to start getting into that sort of mid-tier that you talked about, where it's like, I've started with a theme, but I want to customize it. That sounds like it'd be quicker, but it almost always ends up being more work than if you had just started from scratch.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so the theme template area is, again, it's not necessarily wrong, but it's definitely something, I guess, that you just got to be careful about and know what you're getting into, and it's usually just right for a time and place, before you move on. Yeah,
absolutely. The other one that comes to mind for me is messaging.
Yeah,
I think
on my list too.
Yeah, I definitely think that's an area where things can start to kind of go awry.
Yeah,
and messaging is a critical one. So the way that I look at that is like, what are the stories what are the story points we're trying to get across?
Yeah.
And if it doesn't convey those story points well, then you've kind of lost them in the journey.
Yeah, for sure. I think like clarity is a huge thing that goes along with that. Like I almost look at it as clarity first and then story second a little bit. And the main reason for that for me is I've just visited too many homepages of websites where you scroll and you get to the bottom and you still don't even know what's the business.
What's it about? Yeah.
What are they selling? What am I here for? Like,
yeah.
What do they actually do? I saw one that was quite comical the other day. Even when you click through, I couldn't find the information on their homepage, and then they had a what we do section. And within the first 2 blocks of that page, I still had no idea what they did. I was just immediately checked out after that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else that it could?
Yeah, I think the other one, we sort of touched on it before, but I think certainly being too conversion focused is where things can go a bit awry. If you've got as I said, like a pop-up on every page and things sliding in all the time and endless free offers, it can just, I guess, all get a bit intense for the user. I think the thing with offers and conversions and that sort of thing is, well, twofold, is really just again thinking about what content would actually be truly useful for that user. So don't just write an ebook because you think you need an ebook and then plaster it all over your site. Like, actually think about content that would be helpful for your customers. Or, it doesn't even have to be content, it can be tools or anything that they might want access to. And then the second thing, I guess, then is just, again, that same level of clarity, like not having too many offers,
Yeah.
It's probably almost too easy to sit there and brainstorm 5 or 6 different ways that you could hook people in with the free consultation this and a free ebook that and a register for this webinar. But
it becomes a bit overwhelming, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's the same as we see with messaging. If you're trying to say too many things, you'll end up just being all noise. So I think it's the same with with your offers and that sort of conversion focus is pick one or two that are really strong and that people really, really want, instead of just shotgun approach of having 10, that are probably just mediocre.
Good call. I like it. All right, let's round this out with some examples. The one that comes to mind for me of something that represents a great example of a website is a site which is called Bezier. So this is actually like a micro.
Bezier.
Yeah, Bezier. Yeah, this is a microsite by Patagonia. And I know I keep banging on about Patagonia, but I do love them.
You're on the take from them, aren't you?
Yeah. It's a microsite, but if you go to beziers.patagonia.com, you will see that it's just this. It uses a rich video story right from the homepage, and there's just a headline. This is Beziers, and it's essentially a play button, but it shows all this beautiful imagery, so it just really sucks you in. It takes away all that density that you usually find in websites, and it's just very clean and simple. And then as you get into the experience, it's really interesting because it's a side scroll rather than a horizontal top to bottom, so it just feels very different. Again, they use this really clean kind of layout, and just tells a lovely brand story, and also it tells a great brand story because it gets out of the way of the story, which is actually to protect this Beziers. It's kind of hard to say Beziers. So it takes the brand away a little bit and allows you to focus in on the story that they're trying to tell, and they do such a great job of it. So yeah, if you want to check that one out.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a look at it too. It's definitely in that zone where web can provide just such an immersive and bespoke experience. Obviously it takes a fair bit of investment to pull off something like that, but certainly, like you talked about at the top, for you to compare that to any other interaction or way that brand would try and communicate that story, having this very immersive experience with video and text and different ways to interact makes it so interesting, and you wouldn't really be afforded that anywhere but the web.
Yeah, exactly. And so it just allows users to go to the level of depth that they feel comfortable with. Some of us are skimmers, some of us are really detailed.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think that's where this website, particularly for me, stands out, is that you can get really immersive in the story. So
cool.
What do you got?
Yeah, my one for this week was UpBank, which is one of the many, many new mobile-based banks that are appearing out of nowhere all of a sudden. And I guess the part of the reason why I picked it was I feel it does quite a good job of marrying that brand story with a very practical story. So they actually have, just some really nice clear copy, within the first few seconds on the site. I think it's pretty obvious what it's all about, and it is a new concept. A lot of people wouldn't know what a mobile bank is, but they have, I think, a good marriage of enough content and enough story, but also they get quickly into the features, and they use some really nice devices, I think, in terms of communicating those features. So there's a bit of interaction and animation, sort of showing you, I guess, what you might typically see, say, in a bank feed of transactions, and then it quickly morphs into what that looks like within their environment. But at the same time, I guess there's this heavy brand layer of design and personality that's coming through. So they're doing, I think, quite a good job of marrying the two together.
Nice, good stuff. Well, I think that's a good place to end.
Sweet.
All right. That's websites done. Yeah.
Easy.
All right. Thanks, MC.
Thanks, mate.